Hello folks, welcome to another edition of this irregularly produced radio program called the Dr. Mark Foster Show. Today I will talk about a subject known as exopolitics. Anybody who is unfamiliar with the world of so-called ufology, the study of UFOs, or as they are known in the UK, UFOs, would probably be unfamiliar with that term. It is a branch of ufology, or perhaps one might say an approach to ufology. Ufology is a very divided area. People have vastly different views on extraterrestrials, what they are, whether in fact they are extraterrestrials, or as some people call them, ultra-terrestrials, meaning beings from other dimensions, interdimensionals, transdimensionals. So exopolitics is one of a number of approaches that some people have taken to that subject. It is also very closely connected with the so-called disclosure movement, and many, but not all people who identify with the disclosure movement also subscribe to some version of exopolitics. The disclosure movement, popularized by people like Stephen Greer and Stephen Bassett, is a bunch of people who are trying to get governments around the world to reveal alleged secrets that they have on extraterrestrials, and in some cases regarding extraterrestrial technology. Especially in some cases there have been reports supposedly that some governments have developed free energy devices, which is a common topic of discussion on the far right, the libertarian right, people who are really into this idea that somehow the government has discovered these free energy sources, either directly from extraterrestrials or perhaps by reverse engineering their spacecraft. I am not aware of any hard empirical evidence that would support that. Wouldn't discount it entirely, but I think that the fascination with, in some cases obsession with that idea, is a bit ludicrous. Regardless, more specifically on exopolitics. Exopolitics is based on the assumption that since there are intelligent beings throughout the universe, which I would agree with, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, said that every star has its own planets, and every one of those planets has its own creatures, and then he continued that no man could possibly compute the number of creatures in the universe. So the universe is very, very vast, has much more life than most people think, and certainly Baha'u'llah, as the manifestation of the Father, the greatest name of God on this planet, would have that kind of information. So I'm acknowledging that there is life throughout the universe. To use the common expression, the universe is teeming with life, literally, filled with life, from one end to the other. On the other hand, the idea of exopolitics takes this a bit further. Many people who are involved in exopolitics have attempted to figure out ways of actually establishing good, in effect, diplomatic relations with people on other planets. Here is one illustration. This is by a fellow named Richard E. Yinger from a blog called Exopolitics. exosociology. Now, exosociology is something that I do subscribe to, in a sense, but that's about as far as I would get. Iyengar says, there is a vast amount of literature that supports this hypothesis of life on other planets. I have looked at this issue from a sociological perspective since creating the term exosociology in 1974. Life on other planets exists as a social fact. The term social fact goes back to a French sociologist named Émile Durkheim. Even if it does not exist as a biological fact, if we ever discover life forms in a biological sense, the implications will be largely sociological for our planet. So, that part I can agree with. However, exopolitics is miles and miles apart from exosociology. One of the people who has been involved with exopolitics is a fellow named Ed Komarek. In a book called UFOs, Exopolitics, and the New World Disorder, he wrote, when Alfred Weber introduced the term exopolitics into the public domain over a decade ago, this galvanized into organized action several individuals who had already been thinking along these lines. These individuals were Paula Harris, Michael Salla, Alfred Weber, Tom Hansen, Steve Bassett, Manuel Lameroy, and myself. Bill Uhouse released a statement to Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project that summarizes his very detailed story of gray Earth human cooperation in the field of aerospace. The term gray, sometimes referred to as gray aliens or gray extraterrestrials, is a hypothetical species of extraterrestrials from one corner of the universe. Many people have claimed to see them. I have not, so I can neither affirm nor deny that possibility. There are alleged photographs of them. I've seen them. I don't know if they are authentic. One person has actually produced skulls, which he alleges are skulls of these gray aliens. Again, I cannot substantiate those either. Here is how exopolitics is further defined by Ed Komarek. As a child and young man, I grew up among some of the earliest ecologists, and now strive to move into the newly emerging field of exopolitics forward as one of the founders. Exopolitics is simply defined as the politics of the universe. Exopolitics is about extraterrestrial races and civilizations and how these advanced spacefaring cultures interact among themselves and with us. Okay, so how are we to place exopolitics and terrestrial politics into this greatest possible perspective? I suspect that these very few individuals and their families incarnating together could be the elite globalists whose agenda is to maintain dominion over Earth and its peoples out of predatory self-interest. These individuals seem stuck in a lower state of consciousness, that of a feudal nature that takes a win-lose approach to life. That is not an uncommon perspective. Many of the people who are supporters or proponents of exopolitics share that kind of far-right libertarian idea that there are these elitists who are conspiring in a cabal to establish a somehow boogeyman world government, taking away people's freedoms, taking away people's guns. Many people who believe in this stuff are parts of the so-called gun culture. They even use that term, many of them, for themselves. And they really are afraid that there is going to be a world government, something which I am anxiously waiting for, is something which they very fearfully oppose. Ed Komarek also wrote, "My main interest and intent in the field of exopolitics is not to prove that ET spacecraft exist, and that various ET races with different ethical levels are very active on, in, and around Earth. I am already convinced of this fact. What I am interested in is to gain from the wisdom of the ethical ETs," which I suppose would assume that he thinks that there are unethical ones, which many of them do. Well, continuing. "And to share it with my fellow human beings. Therefore, my main interest is in cases of contact where individual civil liberties are fostered and respected. I am not interested in cases of contact, nor do I wish to involve myself with unethical ET races that violate basic human rights and liberties." So, as you can see there, he, like many people in the exopolitics movement, is coming from a strong libertarian, or at least quasi-libertarian perspective. His entire emphasis is on individual freedom. His concern is that somehow there have been these, what he calls unethical ETs, who have been depriving people of their freedom. Many people regard so-called alien abductions as examples of that, and some people have even argued that the people, namely the Greys, who were performing these alien abductions have been removed from power, and now only the ethical extraterrestrials have any power on the Earth. So, as you can see, there's a great deal of silliness, outlandishness in this movement. Many of the people involved, I assume, are serious. They really believe this. Others, I have a pretty good sense, are simply hoaxers. There is a tremendous amount of hoaxing, of trickery, of fraud in the entire field of ufology. People have their own agendas. They're looking to make money. Like any of these fringe areas, there's where you have people willing to believe in these things. It's very easy to get up there and grandstand and claim to be somebody special, and most likely somebody will listen to you and promote you. You'll gain an instant audience. I've seen this happen on numerous occasions. I've also seen some relatively high-profile people in the ufology field themselves be duped by other people in the ufology field. So there's a lot of trickery and nonsense that goes and passes around as so-called science, or in some cases, exopolitics. According to Michael Salla, this is from a book called Exopolitics, Political Implications of the Extraterrestrial Presence. There is an increasing likelihood that official government disclosure of an ET presence will instantly catapult the topic from the shadowy world of conspiracy theories, alternative science, and New Age philosophy to mainstream public policy. Such disclosure will lead to the birth of a new field of public policy, exopolitics, which can be defined as the policy debate over the choices governments and populations need to make in formulating and implementing legislative and policy responses to the presence of ETs in human affairs. That's one example. Now, one of the more unusual individuals, I won't judge him, not saying he's wrong or right, but certainly he is a bit unusual. A fellow named Alfred Lambramont Weber. He actually runs an internet radio show where he interviews people, similar to what I do, except he actually has other people besides himself. I may do that eventually, but haven't thought about it quite yet. Here is what Weber says. Apparently he is an attorney, or at least he has his J.D. degree and also a master's in education degree. This passage or excerpt I will read comes from his book, Exopolitics, Politics, Government, and Law in the Universe. Okay, be prepared for some really, really strange stuff. The exopolitics model holds that Earth is presently isolated from interaction with organized intergalactic civilization because it is under intentional quarantine by a rational, structured universe society. There are signs around us, however, of a universe initiative to reintegrate Earth into interplanetary society. It is possible that Earth may be permitted to rejoin universe society under certain conditions at a future time certain. In the quarantine hypothesis, Earth's humanity is not sufficiently morally involved to be unilaterally included in a universe dimensional role. Universe society does not want us to export war or violence into interstellar or interdimensional space. The powerful nations of Earth, led by a secret command and control network in the United States, are attempting to continue the militarization of outer space. These Earth nations are on a collision course with universe society's ethics and laws pertaining to the peaceful use of space. The militarization of outer space may be the single most important factor preventing the end of Earth's isolation from civilized space society. Humanity may not be permitted into universe society without an absolute ban on warfare and weapons in a jurisdiction ruled by the standards of a common universe government. Public interest diplomacy with off-planet cultures complements the goals of the disclosure movement, which seeks the release of reverse-engineered extraterrestrial energy, propulsion, and other technologies allegedly held in secret by certain terrestrial governments, most notably the U.S. government. Now, one other individual I will finally mention is Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer, a medical doctor, who is one of the more well-known figures, both in exopolitics and perhaps especially in the disclosure movement. This is his approach to it, and I think it is better than some of the others, but still a bit odd. We have watched with some concern the emerging area of exopolitics, as it has taken a dangerous and potentially ruinous turn toward rumor, urban myth speculation, and inflammatory xenophobia. In other words, fear of people who are outsiders. While there are certainly diverse opinions regarding why any given extraterrestrial civilization may wish to visit Earth at this time in our history, recent comments by Michael Salla have added a virulent strain of fear-based xenophobia based on the flimsiest of documentation. Today, we see racist appellations applied to certain alleged ET groups: the Greys, the Reptilians, the Tall White Ones. Must we go down this tired, dirty path once again? Must we replay the sordid history of human racism, prejudice, and xenophobia as we begin our first steps towards the stars? There is no way to assess an ET agenda without first grasping covert human agenda. It is not easy. It takes enormous patience, perseverance, diligence, and care. But it is worth it. For to do otherwise is to wittingly or unwittingly make exopolitics an arm of the propaganda war machine. So again, as I said, that is a much more attractive approach. Still, in my opinion, a bit odd, in a way, but just the idea that somehow that our concern at this point in history needs to be how can we engage with extraterrestrials. I think instead that our major concern is how do we engage with other human beings on this planet. Extraterrestrials, I think, are watching over us, but not because they are looking necessarily to engage with us at this time, but because they don't want us to destroy ourselves. They are functioning in a kind of angelic capacity for us. So I personally don't agree with that basic premise of exopolitics, which is that we human beings, at least in the 21st century, should be concerned with our relations with non-terrestrial species. Now, one extension of exopolitics has been this notion of what I call intentional contact. Intentional contact, in other words, with extraterrestrial beings. To do that, many people in both exopolitics and in the broader disclosure movement have utilized psychicism, in other words, psychic phenomena, in order to deliberately, willfully make contact with extraterrestrials. They've used various types of ESP, extrasensory perception, including remote viewing, which is a kind of systematic clairvoyance, channeling non-terrestrial entities, and astral projection, in other words, out-of-body experiences. For example, James Gilliland is one of the major proponents of this idea. He is the director of an organization or a group called Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is actually a ranch which he owns in a place called Trout Lake, Washington. Fascinating place. Allegedly he has seen various starships, orbs, other entities flying around in a mountain area just outside, in a sense, as he describes it, his backyard, basically the backyard to his ranch. Here is how Gilliland describes what he does. This process is what some refer to as the quickening. The veils between worlds are lifting, yet most are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually unprepared for this process. Come learn powerful tools, techniques, and experience initiations of the highest consciousness and energy. James Gilliland will share his experiences with the appearance of spiritual masters and other off-world visitors. His near-death experiences opened up what can only be referred to as interdimensional mind, which covers a very wide range of subjects, including near-death experience, life after death, the process of where one goes according to consciousness, clearing unseen negative influences, and more. Now, back in 2012, Gilliland published a channeling that he did. That's one aspect for some people with exopolitics, of a being named G.L.R. Michael. Name is spelled M-I-C-H-A-L. This is the alleged channeling communication. It is now established and was decided as of Earth date, Wednesday, July 25th, 2012, by the Pleiadian High Council, in alliance with 4 other galactic councils, under Galactic Codex guidelines, that we, the Pleiadian family of light, will now intervene fully into Gaia's ascension, Earth's ascension. Furthermore, it has been decided that we will make full contact with Earth beings in 8 days from this transmission, on August 4th, 2012, at the World Olympic Games in London, England, for the entire world to see. Our disclosure date has been given to you. We have given your world leaders until August 4th, again this is August 4th of 2012, to move out of the way, or they will be moved out of the way between you and us. They have interrupted our disclosure since April of this year, 2012, and we have waited until this, the very last moment, doing all we could to stop the destruction on Earth without direct intervention. That time has now come to its end. In 8 days, all world G20 leaders will announce us, and we will appear, or they will not, and we will appear anyway. Those leaders opposed will be removed and will not be a part of the good work we will do with you and for the rest of 2012 and beyond. The door is now open, and we are coming through. Gilliland has since acknowledged, obviously, that was incorrect, but I think what that does, at the very least, is it illustrates the problems with channeling. Those kinds of activities are not reliable. Relying upon psychic forces inevitably results in confusion, miscommunication, misunderstanding. Psychic faculties, from a Baha'i perspective, are not intended to be used in this world. As I see it personally, which I've mentioned on previous programs, we all have a kind of psychic field which surrounds each one of us. Some people call it an aura. Some people have observed orbs. Some people report ghosts. I think basically it is that same basic psychic field. It's not the actual soul or self of the individual. It is a kind of perhaps communications device which can be used by individuals, but it's not meant for here. My personal feeling is that although using our psychic faculties here may cause some problems for us upon our arrival into the next world, I doubt whether that is permanent. That's just my own guess. But I think the problem is that if we have used these abilities like telepathy or clairvoyance or remote viewing or channeling, whatever, if we have done these things here, then we may have created a kind of distortion in perception of our psychic fields. And therefore, when we arrive, we will not be perceiving things correctly, and our ability to communicate with other souls may be, at least temporarily, disabled. So I think that's the major point of it. We're not supposed to use those powers here. They're real, but the reason why people mess up so much, make so many mistakes, is because we have an imagination. We are, in effect, walking in the dark if we use those faculties here. We have not been given instructions to do that, because those faculties are not meant for this world. Now, Stephen Greer, in addition, also has some mystical or esoteric interests. In attempting to contact alien beings, Greer and his followers, through his organization called the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or CSETI, have cultivated various cities. The term city is a term used in Kundalini Hinduism. It refers literally to a power or an ability. In some branches of Hinduism, it is literally regarded, like the Kundalini, as being an energy which is at the base of the spine. The word Kundalini translates as coiled serpent. So the idea is that this energy is in effect coiled at the base of the spine in what is sometimes called the root chakra. And through various spiritual exercises, we can raise that energy through the other chakras, eventually ending up in the crown chakra at the top of the head, or what is also referred to as the 1,000-petaled lotus. Here is what Greer has described. This is a personal experience which he gives in a book, or a portion of a book that he has written or started writing, called Improbable Messenger. That's easy for me to say. God does exist, as do his messengers. For me, nothing would ever be the same. I wondered about some of the so-called cities or spiritual powers described in the Vedas. Those are the Hindu scriptures. I thought it would be interesting to test the limits of this for the physical body. I began to think about the abilities we have. If we are all consciousness, and our bodies are actually filled with the light of awareness, what might we really achieve? In the hotel room, I went through the extraterrestrial protocol we'd created in 1973 on a spacecraft. Parenthetically, I will mention what that protocol is after I finish going through this. I then went into a state of unbounded consciousness, and then expanded awareness off the mountain, around the Alps, into space, and out into our solar system. Seeing the vastness of space, I said to these craft and ETs on board, "My name is Steve. I don't know if you remember me, but we met a couple of years ago." Now, I don't know what to make of that exactly. I'm not going to criticize it. In effect, what Dr. Greer says is essentially what he described there, but basically that you get into a kind of meditative state. Greer has certain suggested meditations that he gives. Some of them have been recorded, are available on YouTube. Then he suggests that people attempt to visualize the occupants of a spacecraft after spotting it. And then once a person has visualized that spacecraft using remote viewing, to eventually engage in a kind of dialogue. So literally it's a kind of applied exopolitics. That strikes me as enormously strange, but regardless, that is what Greer does. So this is a quotation from Greer in his own words. Number 1, we train people in a meditation technique. It is Vedic, referring again to the Vedas, to be able to go into a deep level of the unbounded mind. From there, we teach them a Vedic approach to view distant places. Once there is a lock-on and seeing an extraterrestrial vehicle, then we turn it into what we call a coherent thought sequencing, where we then connect to their people or their communication system. And then we use our own coherent thought sequencing like a laser to show them our exact location. When you have a group of people doing this, we have never done it where we have not had contact in some form. That's the first part. That's the primary part, because interstellar civilizations use technologies that interface with consciousness and thought, always. Number two, because our minds may not be as accurate, we have some electronic signals that were recorded in the crop circles. Crop circles are various formations which are made in farming areas, primarily in the UK, but also in other parts of the world. And some people have alleged that at least some of them were created by extraterrestrial beings, or perhaps by orbs, or what I call chalices of pure light. I have no problem with that idea, by the way. And also, when we made contact in Mount Shasta, California, there was a tone that came through that was extraterrestrial. And actually, everyone in the group, about 30 or 40 people, from the sound, could see the form of the craft. It's sort of the Vedic concept of name and form, where the vibratory resonance forms the shape. But we recorded it on a little tape recorder, and so we have now processed that, and we are sending that out into space over radio signals from our site. And the third are lasers. We have rather high-powered lasers that you're not supposed to have. Then he laughed. And we send those up as a vector point, because the one that I use will go 100 miles into space. So we use these three things simultaneously. After we have prepared people to do this in a spirit of universal peace, without prejudice, without fear, and without trying to pick and choose among the extraterrestrial civilizations, because this is a senior ambassador team, meaning an ambassador team to the universe. And even if you were to believe that some of them might not be friendly, you need an ambassador to North Korea and Iran more than you do to Great Britain. So my point is that this is the path of wisdom. Well, personally, I would question whether, in fact, that is wisdom. Shoghi Effendi quoted Baha'u'llah, giving, I think, a really important illustration of the type of contact, or one of the types of contact, that we can have with beings from other worlds in this world. Shoghi Effendi wrote, "On every daring adventurer in the service of the cause of Baha'u'llah, the concourse on high shall descend, quote, each bearing aloft a chalice of pure light." That is where I got that term, chalice bearers of pure light. That's one way. Also through prayer. Praying to God, praying to the prophets of God, praying to other departed souls. As I've said before, I frequently will pray to the Universal House of Justice, to my guardian angel, to Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the cause of God. I think that that type of spiritual communion is unlimited, and as long as we are aware of the differences in station, Shoghi Effendi said through his secretary, it really doesn't matter so much where we direct our thoughts. So I commonly will direct my thoughts to all sorts of beings throughout the universe. Generally speaking, many of these practices that are called intentional contact through exopolitics are based on some type of Hindu occultism. Kundalini, for example, Kundalini Yoga, the various forms of Shakti Hinduism are generally very esoteric and occultic. Shoghi Effendi warned Baha'is through his secretary to avoid even associating with people who are involved in this. He wrote through his secretary, "Such occult practices as certain Hindus have introduced in the United States, and which some superficial and superstitious individuals have adopted and are trying by all sorts of devices to popularize, are absolutely foreign, nay, positively opposed to the very spirit and letter of the Baha'i teachings, and the believers, the Baha'is, therefore, should strictly and at all times avoid the company of such people, lest they may unconsciously and inevitably fall under their baneful influence and gradually become alienated from the cause of God, from the Baha'i faith. The friends, the Baha'is, should also be warned not to indulge in such activities that draw their inspiration from Hindu occultist sources, as these do not only lead them away from the cause of God, but can cause them considerable mental harm, and thus permanently injure their mind as well as their body." Shoghi Effendi, once again through his secretary, also said, "Truly mystical experiences based on reality are very rare, and we can readily see how dangerous it is for people to go groping about in the darkness of their imagination after the real thing. That is why, as you point out, we are warned against all psychical practices by the Master, by Abdu'l-Baha. If we are going to have some deeply spiritual experience, we can rest assured God will vouchsafe it to us without us having to look for it." And finally, again, from Shoghi Effendi through his secretary, "With reference to psychic phenomena referred to in your letter, these, in most cases, are an indication of a deep psychological disturbance. The friends, the Baha'is, should avoid as much as possible giving undue consideration to such matters." Well, there you have it. That is my view on the subject. I certainly welcome your comments, whether good or bad. I'm open to whatever you have to say. Just scroll down below this screen and you'll see a place where you can type in a comment in the box. Please leave it. I will respond. I always respond to messages left for me. As long as you are polite, I will engage in a dialogue with you if you like. So until next time, this is Dr. Mark A. Foster. Have a good one.